This is going to be a great session. 3 reasons you're going to love the content I'm about to share with you. Reason number 1 is pretty relevant and timely. Knowing all that we have going on right now, virtual learning, hybrid learning, in-person learning, super relevant, super timely. It's also really practical. The ideas I'm going to share with you are super practical. That's the second reason you'll love this session. These are all ideas. The strategies I'm about to share with you are easy to use. They're practical. They don't take a ton of time to prepare and implement. That's reason number 2. Reason number 3, we'll have a little bit of fun along the way. So let's jump right in. Let's get started. Let's talk about battling boredom, motivating and engaging students in both an online and a virtual format. My interest in boredom and engagement began many years ago when I was an elementary school principal. As an elementary school principal, I had an opportunity to support a student named Chad, a 3rd grader named Chad. I sometimes jokingly referred to Chad as a client of mine. If a principal or an administrator talks about a kid who's a client, that means they probably visit pretty often. Chad was a wonderful kid, but he was the kind of kid that was the round, square, hole peg kind of kid. He loved certain parts of school, but certain academic parts of school he really struggled with. He lived for anything related to recess and PE where he could run and move and kind of express himself, but when he was asked to sit down and focus on academic tasks, he struggled. As a result, his behavior struggled as well, and he was often sent to my office. So here I am in my office one day, and my secretary says, "Chad's here," and I looked at my clock. I said, "Yeah, it's about right. I haven't seen Chad in a couple of days." So Chad comes into my office. I honestly don't remember what he did that particular day to get himself removed from class, but I invite Chad in, and I was typing on the computer, just kind of finishing some stuff up, and thinking to myself, what are we going to do this time? How are we going to support Chad this time? Because I tried all the tips and tricks I knew. I tried taking his recess away and parent conferences. We tried rewards. We tried consequences. Nothing ever really stuck very long with Chad. So he's sitting next to me, and he's starting to hyperventilate and get a little frustrated because he knows probably negative things are going to happen when you get sent to the principal's office. And he blurted out 2 words that changed the course of my career. I owe a debt of gratitude to Chad for these 2 words. Out of his frustration, he just blurted out, "School's boring." I paused for a moment. I thought, okay, how do I handle this one? Because to me, in my experience, school's not boring. Now, as a kid, I was never the great straight A kid all the time, but I liked school. I liked learning. I liked my teachers. I liked all that stuff about school. From my experience, school isn't boring. This is what I did. I paused. I looked at Chad. And I said, "You're right." His eyes got real big. And I could see the little mouse on the wheel in his brain thinking, did I just win the battle? Am I getting out of trouble? And so I wasn't agreeing with Chad that I really believe school's boring, but I had to validate his experience. What the most significant outcome of that interaction was it just bothered me. That night I stayed up thinking, what's boring? What's engaging? From a student perspective, not from a grown-up or an adult perspective. That very next day, I started digging into the academic research, talking to everybody I could, looking at anecdotes, strategies, everything I could to figure out from a student perspective, what is boring and what is engaging. Some of that information I'm going to share with you during this session. For example, some of the stuff I found out when I started getting into the academic research, this is pretty interesting. I found out that men are more prone to boredom than women. Men are more prone to expressing boredom than women. Did you know that? That you might say that, well, that's a no-brainer. But some of the stuff I'm going to share with you relates directly to kids and strategies. We'll share a little bit of the research, a little bit of the big picture. We'll make some personal applications, but most importantly, I've got 10 really good strategies coming your way. So here is actually our very first strategy coming your way. Now, I don't know if you're by yourself or if you're with someone else who's viewing this session with you, or if you're on your own viewing it in your own environment. If you're by yourself, great, just have an internal conversation on this next question. If you're with someone else, pull them over and have a conversation. Here's your conversation. They're sentence starters. Have a brief conversation. Let's make the whole concept of boredom and engagement personal first. What are the indicators? Question number 1 right at the top. What are the indicators that you're personally engaged in something? I know I'm engaged in something when, for example, I know I'm engaged in something when I don't even worry about the clock. Time just kind of flies. I also know I'm engaged. Typically, a characteristic for me is when I can have some fun and laugh and move my body and enjoy the people around me. When I can kind of do some of those things, I'm probably more likely to be engaged. On the other end, what are the indicators that you're bored? I get bored easily when, for example, I get bored easily when the person just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks for minutes, if not hours on end. I check out pretty quickly. Here's your task. In just a moment, go ahead and pause the video. If you're with someone else, pull them in. Pause the video if you're by yourself, and just consider these two questions real briefly. How do you know you're engaged in something, and how do you know you're bored, or how do you know you get bored, or what are the characteristics of each of those? When you're ready to continue, this should only take about 2 minutes if you're with someone, also about 2 minutes if you're by yourself. Just think of these characteristics. Pause the video when you're ready to proceed. Press play once again. And welcome back. Let's continue on our discussion. A little bit of background, a little bit of housekeeping business before we proceed. Anything you see up on the screen, if you want to grab some of that information, a couple of different ways you can go about doing it. You can get your phone out and take pictures. You can use the print screen button on your monitor or on your keypad. That'll grab the image up off the top of the screen. Or if you want a PDF of this same information, send me an email. You see my email address right there, and I'd be glad to share this with you. Brief background. I won't go into a ton of my background, but brief personal background. I mentioned earlier, I've been an elementary school principal. I've been a classroom teacher at the middle school level. I've been a district level administrator many years. I did district level work. I've been an academic coach. I've done a lot of stuff, adjunct work at universities, all kinds of cool stuff. Essentially, I am a lifelong educator. Since I graduated from college, I've done nothing other than be in education. We're family. We speak all the same language. Along the way, I've gotten some college degrees. I've written some books. I have a website. If you're interested, you can find out more about me there. I'll give you a little bit more insight coming up here in just a moment, but if you're interested, you can find out more about me in those places. Here's an agenda. For those of you who like to see some sort of an agenda in these kind of sessions, here you go. We are going to look at 10 different strategies that you can refer to in 2 different ways. 10 strategies, 2 ways. What do I mean by that? We'll talk about each of these strategies you see on the left. We've already done 2 of them, and we'll talk about how you can use those strategies both in person and online. So let's back up. I told you the story of Chad. It turns out stories are specially processed in the brain. The brain loves stories. In fact, it's easier to remember stories than it is facts and details. I can tell stories in person. I can tell stories online. They're highly engaging tools. If you're not already a pretty good storyteller, find out ways to revise your abilities to tell stories. Short, brief stories. You'll notice the Chad story I told you was only a couple minutes long. You don't have to go into long depth stories. Stories are uniquely processed in the brain. That's good. So I can tell stories if I'm in a virtual setting like this, or I can tell them when I'm in person. The previous strategy we just did, I get easily bored when, those are just examples of sentence starters. Also something I can do live with kids or virtual. This is what we know about student conversations. If you note, I asked you if you're with someone, pull them in. Give your students a specific way to start the conversation. Too often we say, turn to a partner and summarize, or turn to a partner or share, or find someone else and tell them what you know. For some students, they do just fine with that strategy. Other students do much better when you say, start your discussion with these sentences. I get easily bored when, just finish it off. Sentence starters are super simple, but they're highly valuable and highly effective when it comes to engaging and promoting thinking. In the rest of our session, here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at 10 different strategies, and we'll think about how we can use each of those 10 different strategies both in person as well as an online session. Let's keep the ball rolling. We're going to take a couple of minutes and do a quick 10,000-foot overview of boredom and engagement. I mentioned earlier, right after Chad told me that, I stayed up that night, really bothered by this. I wanted to figure out what is boring from a student perspective, what's engaging from a student perspective. I started asking my teachers. I said, what's fun, what's engaging, what are you doing to get your kids really excited about learning? Partially, I needed to know how many other Chads did I have at my school. So the good news is, I didn't find a bunch of other Chads who were just so frustrated, they were just blurting out and they were behaving poorly. What I did find, unfortunately, was a decent number of students who were just kind of there, who were just kind of enduring school. Maybe as a student you can relate to that, where you just kind of endured the experience of school, and that saddened me. So I started talking to a lot of people, looking at the academic research, looking at the books, everything I could get my hands on. I'm going to share a little bit of that with you here in the next couple of minutes. We'll do a quick 10,000 foot overview of boredom and engagement. In that journey, I came up with certain terms, or I found certain terms keep coming up in the research over and over and over again. Let me pause for a moment and take a look, lean into the screen. These are some of the terms and ideas related to the concept of boredom. Take a look. Allow me to highlight just a couple of things for you. We won't go all the way down throughout the entire list. But we know that engagement and boredom are related to my attention. We know that they're an emotional state. You've been in situations before where you were so bored, it just kind of was a weight on you. It was very much an emotional condition, wasn't it? Some of you get so bored or have been so bored in situations, it kind of ached in your body. Actually, the French have a word for it, ennui. It's just that whole body ache when you're so bored and checked out of something. Now, there's some interesting research that suggests that for most of us, boredom is situational. What does that mean? You put me in a context or a situation or an environment that doesn't meet my needs, that's uninteresting, that's irrelevant, and I tend to then express or consider boredom or think of myself as being bored. It's the situation we're in. Other people, it's a smaller subset of the population, it's dispositional. It's just kind of who they are. They just kind of get bored easily. Good news, most of us, it's the situation. The good news there is we can manipulate or influence the situation our students are in. Going all the way back, well over all those years ago, I decided to come up with a definition, a classroom definition of boredom. In the very first version of my first book called Battling Boredom Part 1, here was the definition I created. Take a look. Let me highlight just a couple of key words on there. First, it's temporary. The brain's not going to stay bored for very long. It's very much a temporary emotional condition. Emotional means we kind of feel it. It's just marked by disinterest primarily. Whatever the teacher is presenting in front of us, whether it's a lecture or a mini lecture or a video or a reading or a project, whatever it is, we're just not that into it. We tend to check out. Now, in the first version, Battling Boredom Part 1, I used the word sometimes. And I said that, or events provided by the teacher that sometimes result in inappropriate behavior. When I rewrote it, or I updated and I did Battling Boredom Part 2, which is actually a companion book. It's not a revision. It's actually a companion book. They're two separate books. I changed it and I put in the word often. The more I became aware of research out there, the more I became convinced of this. When you're bored, you're going to do something to get yourself out of the boredom. And many of our kids are going to do something to get themselves out of the boredom that are inappropriate or ineffective, or they're just not healthy for classroom environments. They could be as simple as some kids just deciding to pound or tap their pencil. Other kids are going to say, okay, I'm checked out, so I'm going to dig through my backpack for nothing in particular. Other kids are going to overtly express their displeasure. So I changed it from sometimes to often. Now, boredom isn't our goal, obviously. This is kind of the framework we're looking at, what's boredom, what's engagement. So in the process of doing all that research, I also considered the question, well, what's engaging? Here are also some of those terms that came up in the research over and over and over again. Let me highlight just a couple of them for you. The middle word that starts with a W, willingness. What we found is that engagement, true engagement, is just willingness. It's just a sense that, okay, I'll play along. You see, you don't have to get your students to love the content as much as you love it. You just have to get them to take a step forward in willingness to give it a shot. We also know there's motivation in there. It's an attitude. It's involved with attention and participation. And just like with boredom, I also created a definition of engagement, same one I used for both Battling Boredom Part 1, Battling Boredom Part 2. It's a state of emotional and cognitive commitment or willingness to do whatever the teacher is asking us to do. In essence, you can kind of picture it like this. Lean in and look at the screen for just a moment. Imagine some of your students are doing one of these, right? They're leaning back in their chair, arms folded, facial expression is, I ain't with you. Engagement means I go from one of these to I unfold, I lean forward a little bit, cognitively anyway, not always physically, cognitively, and I say, okay, teacher, what you got? I'm willing to listen. You got me for a moment. That's engagement. And really good teachers pull kids in with really good strategies in order to engage them. And I'm excited to share some really good strategies with you here in the next couple of minutes. Let's give a quick part of that quick 10,000 foot overview. I'll show you a little bit of the evidence. I won't kill you with research and evidence, but some of this stuff I think you will find pretty darn interesting. Here's how we'll tackle part of the evidence. Up on the screen, you see 4 true-false questions and 1 fill in the blank or cloze question. Here's your job. If you're with someone else, pull them in, do this together. If you're by yourself, just give it a shot. This whole quiz, this little mini quiz should take you about 30 seconds. Pause the video, give it a shot, see if you can answer those questions. When you're ready to proceed, press play once again. And welcome back. Let's give it a shot. Let's see how you did answering these questions. Number 1, true or false? It's a leading factor in low achievement and dropout. That's true. You probably nailed that one. Number 1 is true. Number 2 is interesting. You might have said, wait a minute, Brian, didn't you kind of tell us this already? Did you let that one slip? Was that a mistake? The answer is no. I did not make a mistake. It was not a slip or a mistake on my part. I put that in there purposefully because I knew this quiz was coming, and I do this with students as well, is sometimes I quote unquote let something slip because I want everyone to get at least one answer right. And part of your brain's also kicked in where you read that and you said, wait, I apologize for the typo on that screen, by the way. It says T or T. It should be true or false, T or F. Some of you might have said, wait a minute, didn't Brian already tell us this? And then you're saying, I wonder what, your brain might have said, I wonder what else he told us or what else he kind of let slip. I do that on purpose because in this case, these quizzes, these little true, false, fill in the blank kind of quizzes are not assessments. I'm not trying to assess your knowledge. I'm trying to engage you in learning. In fact, I'll tell you this. If you use true, false statements or true, false quizzes in your gradebook, stop, it's malpractice. Because a true, false quiz only tells you whether or not kids can flip a coin. That's it. They don't tell you anything of value. So while they're lousy assessments or tests, they're really good at engaging. They're really good engagement tools. So number 1 and number 2 are true. Number 3 is true as well. And number 4, let's take a look at that one. Number 4 is actually false, but we can make it a true one. People prone to boredom report greater incidence of depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. So we can switch that one. It's technically false. We can switch it to true by saying greater instead of fewer. And then boredom and curiosity are leading causes of drug use among teens. Now this strategy is actually the next one on our list that can be used either in person or online. We can either do this in person. When I do this with students, I often do them as bell work. Sometimes midway through the lesson, sometimes towards the end of the lesson. And I say, students, here's your task. Lean in with your shoulder partner and give it a shot. Why do some of these kind of things work? And you can do this in a virtual learning session like we just did right now. Why do quizzes like that work? Well, let me introduce you to 2 really interesting people. Henry Rodiger on the left, he's one of the world's leading memory researchers. He's a researcher at the university level. He says this. Whenever he teaches a course, we do at least 2 things. We write to figure out what we know, not writing to demonstrate learning, but writing to create learning. And we take a quiz and we get pretty immediate feedback, test our knowledge. Great engagement tools. Judy Willis, also teacher and board certified neurologist, she says this, that quizzes work because the brain's a bit of a prediction machine. So those questions, what I asked you to do, even when they were just true, false, I asked your brain to make a prediction. As soon as your brain makes a prediction, it wants to know the result. Even if it doesn't love the content, even if it's not deeply interested in the content. For example, I could have said, take this quiz, and then I could have said, okay, welcome back everyone, let's move on. And you probably would have said, wait, Brian, go back. What's the answer? Because part of your brain wants to finish it off. Part of your brain wants to know the answer. Was I right? Was I wrong? It's a way to get feedback. It's a way to engage. They are wonderful tools. Lousy assessments, really, really great tools. So something like a true false quiz is a great way to go, and we can do them online, in person. We can do them in a number of different ways. Before we go on and talk about the remaining strategies and continue that 10,000-foot overview, a little bit of my background knowledge, a little bit of my interest level. I'm a bit of a brain nerd. We're going to geek out on some brain stuff together. I've been in the world of brain-based learning, have had certifications, have been into this world for a long time. In fact, you probably know some trainers that have models of a human brain. You might have already noticed it, but right over my shoulder right there, if you can see it, that's an actual human brain. That's how much of a geeky brain nerd I am, is that I actually have a brain. Insert joke here. Bryan has a brain. Actually, if we're accurate, here, let me get it for you. Actually, if we're accurate, get the shine off from the camera there, it's a hemisphere of a human brain. So the real joke is Bryan has half a brain. That's how much of this brain stuff I'm into. So some of the background I'm going to share with you comes from the world of brain-based learning and all those sorts of things. If you want to know more about that, you'll send me an email later and we'll talk just a little bit more. Let's continue on our journey. 10,000-foot overview when we're looking at some of the evidence. This is a large-scale research study called the High School Survey of Student Engagement. They asked high school kids, have you ever been bored in class? The results are not encouraging. Of course, these are high school kids, but you should probably know that this particular study has about 80,000 high school kids take that survey. So while the numbers might not always be accurate when we're talking about self-reported surveys, when you get a sample size that big, it's illustrative for us. In other words, it should get our attention when high school kids, 2/3 of them are saying, yeah, pretty much every day. Now, same study, this is what gets a little bit more interesting, is then they ask, well, if you're bored, why are you bored? Pause for a moment, take a look at those 5 statements, then I'll point out something that I thought was extremely interesting in this particular study. Let's start just right at the very top. Material wasn't interesting, 8 out of 10. Okay, we're talking about teenagers. A lot of time teenagers saying nothing's interesting. I get that. But let's say it's exaggerated by 10%. Or let's say it's exaggerated by 20%. The number's still way too high. Not relevant, no interaction with the teacher. What got me most interested in the results of this study are the last 2 statements. More students are saying I'm checked out or disinterested or bored because it's not hard enough, or it's not challenging enough. We know challenging and hard don't necessarily mean the same thing, but more kids are saying the work's not challenging enough, that's why they're bored, than students who are saying it's too hard or too difficult, that's why I'm bored. See, a lot of us as educators, especially at the secondary level, we think my kids are checked out because the work's too challenging for them and they don't want to try. Actually, that's not what students are saying. In the process of learning about all this, I asked myself, is this boredom thing just secondary, just older kids? And the answer is no. This is a study a number of years ago that found high levels of boredom among 5th graders. The grade that would go in the closed statement right in the middle of the screen is 5th. High levels of boredom reported at 5th grade as well. Another Gallup poll done a number of years ago that looked at the percentage of self-reported engagement in school in general, not individual classes. It goes down rapidly from elementary to middle school to high school. It should obviously just get our attention. The Gallup organization called it a monumental collective national failure. It ought to get our attention. In other words, we're saying a lot of our kids are saying, I'm just bored and checked out. The school thing isn't working for me. Okay, it's audience participation time. You can do just this one on your own because it's pretty darn fast. Does it get better? That's the question. Does this engagement boredom thing get better as we get older? 40% boredom is reported in 40% of all academic situations among A, B, C, or D. What do you think? Give it a shot. Which is the correct answer? Hopefully you appreciated my little sense of humor with D. It's not D. The answer is actually A. So it does get a little bit better. Instead of 60% students at the high school level checking out, about 40%, 60% at the college level at undergrad check in. So the number is about 40% of all academic situations among undergrads, but the number is still way too high. And I have shared this information before at colleges and universities, and most of the professors say, yeah, it seems about right. The sad thing is Far too many of us are just accepting of the fact. There's specific things we can do in order to engage our students. Now, I mentioned earlier that quizzes are a great way to engage students. Something like this. Now, previously it was true, false, and some fill in the blank. This is just another way to go about doing some sort of quiz. All you have to do is periodically, during a mini lecture or a lesson, pause what you're doing, pose a question, have them look at it, have them guess, is it A, B, C, or D? Because the brain is that prediction machine. It wants to know the answer. It wants to know the outcome. Was I right? Was I not right? It's a way to engage, not a way to assess, but it's a great way to engage. And something like this, in person, online, they both work really, really well. Continuing that 10,000-foot overview, if you've never heard of the control theory value of emotions before, basically here's what it says. When you're in a situation, particularly a learning situation, but it can also be a relationship or another context, where you have very little control and you see very little value in the content in front of you, that is what some researchers call the perfect storm of boredom. In the classroom, students are given no control over what they do, how they do it, what they learn, why they learn. It's just all one-sided from the teacher. Low control, and there's no relevance, value, personal connection. When those things are absent, that's actually a great way to create boredom. If you wanted to create boredom in your classroom, here's how you do it. Give your students 0 levels of control and don't make any personal connections or make any relevant connections to their lives. That's a perfect storm of boredom, and you've probably experienced that in your own professional life as well. Mentioned earlier, geeky brain stuff. The truth is the brain is not going to stay bored for very long. Boredom is a stressful, unpleasant place. When you find yourself bored, your brain says, get out of there, it's not good. When you find yourself engaged in something, truly into something, your brain says, this is awesome, stay. Boredom says, run away, do something different. Your brain will find something to engage itself in. Now, best case scenario in the classroom, one of your students becomes disengaged and they just do one of these. They just kind of daydream. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, I know you've seen it, some of your students will start acting out. And those acting out things, like the Chads of the world, tend to get them in trouble. A little bit more evidence and background for you, then we'll talk more strategies. This one was interesting. This study was done at the university college level, but it's still pretty interesting. They asked the question you see at the right-hand side of the screen. Would you rather be bored or in pain? This is what they did. They pulled some participants in the study. They brought them into a room and they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you an opportunity to be alone by yourself for about 15 minutes. You're going to go into a room and you're just going to be there by yourself alone with your thoughts. You can't bring in your phone. When you go into the room, there will be a table and a chair, but no magazines, no posters, nothing to read. You're not going to bring anything in with you. It's just you alone by yourself, you and your thoughts. Now, most of us, especially those of us who are parents, you would think to yourself, that would be awesome. I would love 15 minutes alone by myself. Turns out you probably wouldn't. This is what happened. They brought the first group of people in. They said, here's what's going to happen. We'll set the timer, go into the room, and just be by yourself, just your thoughts, whatever you want to do, but you can't have any external source of stimulation. That first round, the vast majority of people who came out of that first round said, no thank you, I don't ever want to do that again. Because it turns out you probably don't have as many deep thoughts as you think you do. Sitting alone by yourself with no source of external stimulation is actually pretty stressful. People don't enjoy it. Now it gets really interesting. Second part of this study that got fascinating. They brought volunteers in, and same setup. You're going to go into a room, table, chair, no external stimuli, can't bring in your phone, nothing to read. But right before they went in, there was a silver box on the table. And they asked them, please touch this box. And it gave them a mild electric shock, like static electricity, like you rub a balloon on your hair, just a little bit of static electricity. Not truly like really painful, but unpleasant is probably a better word. So they touched it and was like, oh, okay. And then they went into the room. You know where the story's going, don't you? When they got into the room, there was nothing there except on the table was that same electric shock box. And you can see the result. 2/3 of men, instead of being just by themselves, 2/3 of us started playing with the box. Even though it was slightly painful, it was not pleasant, it was not good for you. But women, 1 out of 4 of you still did it. We voluntarily gave ourselves an electric shock rather than be bored. Now let's make a connection. How many of your students who will do things even though, quote unquote, they know it's not good for them or they know it's going to get them in trouble, but they choose it anyway because the alternative is boredom? Wow, this stuff is fascinating, isn't it? If you're interested in doing a deeper dive into any of this stuff, probably the best at this point that I'm aware of, the best academic look at boredom and engagement was done by Walcott and her colleagues, and you can see some of the data, some of the information on there, that it's a significant issue. Boredom is a significant issue for our kids, and it's holding a lot of our kids back. If you like this effect size stuff, if you follow John Hattie, he's recently added to the negative effects. Boredom has a negative effect size. What's an effect size if you're unfamiliar? It's just a number. It's a tool statisticians and researchers use in order to ask and answer this question. If you do this, will it have a positive payoff? Now, we want to keep things in the blue zone, the zone of desired effects, because things beyond a 0.4 and above show us about a year's worth of growth. When we get to negative effect size, what does that mean? It actually helps we regress. Boredom is on the bottom 5 or 6 things that have a negative effect size. It ought to get our attention, in other words. All right, here is our next strategy that can be used 2 ways, in person, online. We're going to pause again for one moment. If you're with someone, pull them in and have this as a conversation. If you're by yourself, I'll ask you to pick up a pen or a pencil and do a quick write. You could certainly do it on the keyboard as well. MIP stands for most important point. In our first half hour or so together, of all the information I've shared with you, what seems to you as the most important point? What's floating right to the top of your head, right to the top of your thinking as the most important point? It can be a strategy that we've talked about. It can be a concept from research. It can be a statistic. Whatever it is that's the most important, make a personal application. So pause the video, do that now. When you're ready to proceed, press play once again. And welcome back. Let's continue our discussion. I promised you 10 strategies 2 ways. Here is our progress so far. Each of these strategies can be done either in person or virtually, fairly easy. That's what we're keeping track of. Now let's talk about one. We'll do the next one. We'll do a slightly deeper dive into the concept of physical movement. First, real quick question. This social science research is pretty good. Everything I've shared with you so far is mostly from psychology, sociology kind of stuff. But I mentioned I'm a bit of a brain nerd. Question, what's happening inside my brain when I tend to be bored or checked out? Well, it turns out boredom is pretty stressful. When there's high levels of stress or unmanageable levels of stress, there's less activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of my brain responsible for thinking and planning and impulse control. Less activity there, more activity in the amygdala. Why does that matter? The amygdala is the part of my brain that processes emotions. When people are bored, they tend to react emotionally rather than logically. This is true of kids and adults as well. Also looking at what probably is happening inside the brain, when we have lower levels of arousal or interest or intrigue or physical movement or any number of things, there's lower levels of dopamine. Dopamine is the neurochemical that we associate with rewards or anticipation of reward or pleasure. Lower levels of dopamine means I'm not probably enjoying the environment very much. And people who are prone to boredom have lower levels of dopamine floating around in our brains. Question, what is engaging? Going all the way back to my original look after Chad bothered me with the statement school's boring, I started putting together kind of categories of things that are probably more interesting or engaging for students than others. On the screen, you see 20 broad categories. I call these kind of umbrella categories. They're not strategies, they're big overall concepts. Like if I have choice, that's probably more engaging than if I don't have choice. If there's novelty, that's probably more engaging than if there's not novelty. Now, these aren't strategies. Strategies are those 10 I'm going to share with you. But here's what I'll tell you. Each of the strategies I share with you have at least one of these core elements. These are what I would call core elements. How would I use this list? The more of these things I can have in a learning environment, the better. There's no way you can do all 20, and it's not an exhaustive list anyway. I don't pretend that these are the only 20, but it's a pretty good start. When for example, if I have a relevant topic in front of my students, and there's an emotional connection, and maybe there's the opportunity to be a little bit creative, When I have a couple of those elements in the learning environment, engagement shoots way up. I can't do all of these in every lesson, but the more of them I can do, the better. Or do some of them really, really well, my students are more likely to be engaged. Here's that promised discussion of physical movement. Allow me to introduce you to your intraparietal sulcus. What's a sulcus? It's one of the grooves. You see it highlighted in red there. It's one of the major grooves in the brain. The parietal lobe, you have lobes in your brain. One of them is the parietal lobe. It's one of the sulci, or one of the grooves within the parietal lobe. What's interesting, here's what I get so excited about this nerdy brain stuff, so hopefully you're geeking out with me. Well, we've known for a number of years that that part of the brain is partially responsible and active when you're moving your digits. Playing the piano, on the keyboard, playing the guitar. When I'm rapidly moving my digits, that part of my brain is active. What they found more recently, and when I learned this, this was a wow moment for me. When I first learned this, it was a wow. We found out recently that that's also the part of the brain that's active when we're trying to make sense of numbers. I'm waiting to see the light bulbs go on over your head, just like it went on over mine when I first learned this. How many of your students, even older students, still occasionally do this? I have a whole bunch of college degrees and I still occasionally count on my fingers. How weird is that? You probably do too. I share this with you for this important fact. The brain and the body are connected. The part of your brain that processes number sense is also responsible for digits and movement. You could, if you're taking notes in the closed statements up at the top there, top right, either word would go in there. The part of my brain that's responsible for number sense and physical movement are the same. See, to the brain, there's no separate thing called the body. To the body, there's no separate thing called the brain. It's one system that all works in tandem. That's why I share this with you, because the next way we want to engage our students is through lots of physical movement. Let me show you a little bit more of the background and the proof and the evidence that physical movement matters. To the brain, there's no separate thing called the body. To the body, there's no separate thing called the brain, and our body was designed to physically move. Sitting still for long periods of time is lousy for cognition. Going back to effect sizes, the higher the number, the better. You will not find many things that have higher than a 1.5 effect size. When we manage the physical energy of our students, good things happen for cognition and engagement and attention and memory and so forth. This particular study found that just standing alone adds between about 12% or so, about 7 minutes an hour of increased engagement. Now, I did price out on that standing desk, the one you see in the picture there, and for most schools and districts, it's a deal breaker. It's about $300. It ain't going to happen. But you know what you can do? You might not have the budget for standing desks for your kids, but you can give them a 99-cent clipboard and have them do their practice work while they're standing, while they're leaning on a wall. Giving them opportunities to physically move is good. Using things like Go Noodle, if you're familiar with Go Noodle, those are great standing stretching breaks. They're all really good at engagement. What we want to do is raise oxygen and glucose levels in their brain. We do that by physical movement. This particular study was done out of one of the Scandinavian countries, forgive me, I forget which one it is, that found that first grade boys had an impact when they're forced to be too sedentary, an impact of a couple of years. Why not girls? The theory is because girls and boys mature at different rates. You probably know that their brains mature at different rates, but also that our brains are designed slightly differently. Girls have a bit of an advantage when it comes to language. That's probably why the impact wasn't there. This particular study found that aerobic movement specifically helped eliminate the gaps between high-income students and lower-income students who might be underperforming when we just get their bodies moving. There's a connection between how my brain functions and how my body functions. We've got to get them up out of their seats. That's the key idea. Now, this idea I absolutely love. I stole from a couple of different researchers that have worked with schools to do reading labs with stationary bikes. You see an elementary example at the top and a high school example on the bottom. The elementary example on the top, that's like a separate room that's like kind of a lab, and then there's the library on the one on the bottom. What's interesting about the one on the top, well, let me clarify something. When we're talking about having them on stationary bikes, we're talking about just a slow pedal. We're not talking about having them work up a sweat where they're out of breath. Why does that probably work just a slow pedal? Because that probably raises alertness, Blood flow and oxygen level to the brain raises alertness. When I'm more alert, I'm more engaged. When I'm more engaged and more alert, I'm probably going to remember more and comprehend more of what I'm reading. Makes sense. You'll also notice in the picture on the top left, all of those stationary bikes are different because they were all donated. So you just get donated bikes. And then you can see it works at the high school level as well. Again, just a slow pedal, raising alertness just a little bit more. Probably the leading researcher or the researcher or author who got us thinking a lot about this from a significant kind of national perspective is John Ratey, and he wrote the book Spark, where he just outlines the power of physical movement and activity for cognition and learning, memory, and so forth. This is what Dr. Ratey says. First, we understand that the brain and the body, the development goes hand in hand. You don't have a separate body, separate brain. It's all one system. They go hand in hand. When we're physically moving our body, it increases exercise. Exercise increases blood flow and oxygen. Those are good things. And most specifically, it releases something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Don't worry, that won't be on the test. He calls it miracle grow for the brain. When you've got lots of that stuff floating around in your brain, learning becomes easier. Engagement, learning, attention, focus, they all become much easier. In case you're not already interested, a little bit more evidence on the power of physical movement. We can look at decades of research on the power and the connection to recess. When we tried this decades ago, didn't we? And some schools are still doing it. Kids who were underperforming, we would take their recess away or significantly reduce their recess in order to give them double and triple doses of academics. And if we're honest, in most environments, it just didn't work a lick. Those students still struggle. There's a lot of evidence that says when students have recess as part of the academic program, almost everything improves. Now, more nerdy brain stuff. This one's interesting. Exercise and non-exercise. You can see the explosion in the picture on the right of new neurons. Those are brain cells. Why is this one so interesting? When we have some physical exercise and movement, we have new brain cells in something called the hippocampus. What's the hippocampus? The part of my brain that's responsible for processing and sorting memory. The part of my brain that's kind of doing that memory learning stuff gets better when I exercise and when I move my body. If you need even more evidence, there's tons and tons of evidence, thousands of peer-reviewed journals and research articles that say the same exact thing. Don't sit still for long periods of time. It's really bad for your brain. So what might we do about it? Here are some easy application points. It could be as simple, and you can do this online. If you see that your students are checked out or they're starting to check out, whatever, simply have them stand and play a 30-second game of Simon Says. Now, I have had some teachers say to me, Brian, I like that idea, but if my administrator walks in and I'm in the middle of playing Simon Says and we're supposed to be in the middle of our math lesson, I don't know how that's going to go. And I say, here's all you do. Most principals I know are totally reasonable people. They just want a good rationale. Just say to your principal, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I might say to my principal, you know, it's 1:15 in the afternoon. They've been back from lunch for about an hour. Their energy levels were pretty low. I was starting to lose their engagement. So I decided to play about 30 to 60 seconds of Simon Says to increase their alertness so that the math sticks. So that the math that I'm about to teach them sticks with them. I'm raising their alertness. You can do standing, deep breathing, stretching, roaming the room, gallery walks. All of those things work really well. This is a bit simplistic, but it works. The brain runs on two things, oxygen and glucose. How can we release or improve the amounts of both of those in their brains? Physical movement. Sometimes even as simple as standing. Those are really, really good. Okay, it's audience participation time once again. If you're with someone, pull them in. If you're by yourself, that's okay. You're going to read both. One of you is going to be partner A, and you're going to read aloud what you see on line A. Then you're going to volley over to partner B. They're going to read aloud. You're going to go A, B, all the way down the line. Here's what you'll do. Pause the video. You and your partner read A, B. If you're by yourself, you get to be both partner A and partner B. When you're ready to proceed, press play once again. Welcome back. Before we proceed, by the way, this is our next strategy that can be done in person, online. You might say, Brian, if I'm virtual and a kid's by themselves, how do they do something like this? It's simple. You tell students, you're going to read aloud A while you're standing, you're going to read aloud B while you're sitting. Or if you have students that are goofy enough, or if you feel your personality is goofy enough to do this, you might say you're going to read aloud A with a pirate voice, and you're going to read aloud B in a super silent or a super whisper voice. You just vary it somehow. So a student can do this by themselves, or they can do it with a partner. Either one works pretty well. On the last one on B on the very bottom, you might have said, I am convinced I'd love to hear more strategies. Well, here you are. Here are more strategies, and on this slide is an opportunity for you as well. I mentioned I've written 2 books, Battling Boredom Part 1, Battling Boredom Part 2. The only thing those 2 books have in common, other than the author and the title, are movement strategies. In Part 1, I called them movement strategies. Part 2, I called them energizers. Partially, the difference is I just use energizers just to energize the body, absent of worrying about connecting to academic content, but I can use movement and support academic content at the same time. If you would like some of these strategies, my email address is on the slide there, and just send me an email and I'll send you a PDF, my gift to you of some of these strategies. Let's continue on. Here's what we've looked at in our first couple of minutes together so far. Stories all the way through A-B partners, 10 strategies that can be done 2 different ways. Here's our next one. It's the use of powerful images. If nobody's ever told you this before, now you have lobes of your brain, correct? Different lobes. You probably know you have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, right? One of the lobes of the brain in the very back is primarily responsible for processing visual information, the occipital lobe. You don't have any other lobe that's just responsible for one sense. You don't have a smell lobe. Interesting. So if the part of your brain, you have a huge part of your brain devoted to processing visual information. Visual information matters quite a bit. Here's your next strategy. Provide images to kids, what I call powerful images. Powerful images are ones that make kids want to think or talk or react in some way. Find images that relate somehow to the content you're teaching, show the image, and prompt a question. Let me show you some examples. Now, I hope this is right. Science teachers in the room, if this is slightly off, forgive me. We're not talking scale here. We're not talking the Earth is that close to the sun. We're talking about comparison sizes. On Earth, I sometimes tend to think of myself as a big deal. When you look at the universe, wow. Because we tell kids the sun is big. It's really big. It's X number of times the size of whatever. When we do something like this, this is kind of image that a lot of kids, not every kid of course, will lean forward and go, whoa. That's what you want. Because when a student leans forward and goes, whoa, you've hooked them. They've now taken that step forward and they're with you. So this one is an interesting image. This is the painted floor of a bathroom. And it looks like a view as if you're in an airplane looking down through like a glass floor and there's somebody falling through the sky. A whole number of different questions or topics we could prompt with something like this. A powerful image doesn't necessarily have to be whoa. Sometimes it's like, huh? Oh, that's okay. The huh, the oh, that means they're starting to be with you. Sometimes they can be funny and humorous. This is probably what you feel the closer you get to not having to do virtual learning anymore, barely hanging on. So sometimes they can be funny. Sometimes they can be no way. This is an actual picture. It's a place in Mexico, I believe it's called the Devil's Hole, where people base jump into a big crater in the ground. So sometimes the image is, no thank you, I don't think so. But it still gets me leaning forward and interested in having discussions. Sometimes they're funny. Every time I look at that, I laugh. Oh my gosh, that's so sad. It's kind of, I don't want to laugh at people's misfortune, but whoever the parents are, they probably kind of deserve that. I know that's awfully judgmental, forgive me. And sometimes they're also, again, a little bit of a no way. Mountain bike riders on a trail on a steep cliff. That's a pretty powerful image right there. And sometimes it's okay to just laugh. Have you seen this one? Look at the one on the right-hand side of the screen first. Can you see? You know what happened, right? Just the typical classroom plastic chairs. Dude stuck his head into it and got stuck. So there's a custodian there with a hacksaw trying to pull him out. And I've used the picture on the right for so many years that about a year and a half ago, a friend of mine who's a principal here in the state of Arizona, I live in Arizona, I don't think I said that earlier, I'm from Arizona, and she's a principal here in Arizona. She sent me that picture. That's actually one of her kiddos. You know what? There's some mistakes you make in life you only have to make once. I bet you this is a mistake they've only made once in their life. So powerful images are just images, pictures, because the brain loves to process visual information. That makes me go forward and say either laugh or huh or no way. There's some sort of an emotional reaction. Recall that engagement is partially emotional. And once we've hooked them, then we connect it to something related to academics. Here's the list so far as we're keeping track in strategies you can use in 2 different ways. Let's take a look at the next one, and that's the use of checklists. That's the use of checklists to track progress. It can be done virtually, in person as well. Sometimes they're self-assessment checklists. The image that you see on the far right, that's actually my notebook. I have a notebook that goes with me everywhere that I write things down, I check them off. If you're a checklist person, if you're like me, you know that there's one thing that checklist people love more than anything else in the world. I'm exaggerating, of course. You know what it is. Checking it off. That gives us kind of a cool sense of accomplishment, doesn't it? When we have a checklist of tasks in front of us, even micro tasks, and we check it off, it gives us a sense of momentum, of success, of accomplishing something. Checklists are a great way to go, and they probably release a little bit of dopamine when we accomplish something. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter associated with reward and pleasure, anticipation of reward. True story. I shared this strategy about a year ago with the school I was working with in Ohio. This particular school had a lot of students with IEPs, 504s, a lot of special needs students. I was in a classroom talking with one teacher. She told me this. She said, Brian, I have a young lady, I think she was a 2nd or a 3rd grader, who doesn't do much of anything. She comes in, she eats her breakfast, and then at most I could get her to read a book. If I'm hovering over her, I could get her to pick up a pen or a pencil, but she just doesn't do anything. I said, let's try this. Let's create a checklist with micro steps and teach her every time you do a micro steps, you check it off. And the micro steps are as simple as go to the bookshelf and get your reading book. Check. Open up to chapter 17 of our story. Check. Right? Locate the first paragraph. Check. Right? All of they're many different, they're accomplishments essentially. Little bit of success. And so I said, just try it. Let's just do an experiment. Let's see what works. I don't know if it'll work or not, but we'll give it a shot. So I was there at that school the whole day. At the end of the day, she came running up to me. She said, Brian, I've never seen this girl work so much in her life. Now, I can't guarantee it was because of checklists, but that's the only intervention we used that day. Checklists can kind of get you motivated and keep you engaged. And this is the reaction you want from some of your kids. You've seen this meme before, right? The kid going, yes. When you accomplish something, good things happen in your brain and in your sense of yourself and in your sense of being able to kind of make next steps. And let's go one level deeper on the power of a checklist. Many times kids go home or at the end of the day, the parents or an adult asks kids, what did you do today? And the kids said, I don't know, or nothing. Train your kids that share the checklist with their families. Because that's a list, that's evidence of what they accomplished, what they learned, what they did that day. So it's a nice way to bridge the gap for the parents and the students as well. Checklists are a great tool, great way to go. Here is our next strategy. They're closed statements, sometimes called closed, C-L-O-Z-E notes, closed notes or closed statements. Here's what we'll do. We're going to pause the video. This time it's just you. If you're with someone, don't pull in a partner because we want to just see how much you remember on this. Here's what I'll ask you to do. If you have notes in front of you, set the notes aside. Don't look at your notes. Just do some retrieval practice right from the top of your brain. See if you can figure out our strategies so far. Each of those have been the strategies we've used so far. Pause the video. Take about the next 30 seconds or so. See if you can figure out what words go in each of those closed, C-L-O-Z-E lines. All right, 30 seconds. Pause the video. Give it a shot. Welcome back. Let's see how you did. Number 1, stories. Number 2, sentence starters, quizzes, most important point, physical movement. Number 6, A-B partners. I forgot a blank in there, so I was using my accent, partners. A-B partners, powerful images, checklists, and closed statements or closed notes. This is actually a really good strategy. It's the next one on our list, actually. When you pause the video, if you're doing virtual, and you say, students, let's pause for a moment, see if you can figure out what goes in each of those blank lines. I've done that a couple of times for you during this session as well, and this can also be done when we're with students live or when we're with them virtually. Just pause, say, hey, quick quiz, quick question, what words go in there? Again, the brain loves predictions. Make a prediction, make a guess, but when I make a prediction or a guess, the feedback, the correct answer, has to be coming pretty quickly. We're talking minutes rather than hours. So pretty quickly you have to follow up and say, here was the correct answer. Did you get it right? And some of that self-correction that happens in their brain is a really good thing for long-term learning. Now we're going to add one more element to close statements, and that is a rating. You're going to do this one on your own. Again, if you're with someone, just say, you know what, do this on your own because this is very personal for me. In just a moment, I'm going to prompt you to pause the video once again, and you're going to rate on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being it's a home run strategy, I can use this, I like it, or I already use it, or I already do something like it. A 10 or a high number, 8, 9, 10, means that's a really good one that's going into my toolbox. A lower rating does not necessarily mean that you dislike the strategy. You're just not sure yet how you would use it or how it would fit into your toolbox. No judgment from me. Your job is to make your own personal applications. You're going to rate each of those 9 that you see on there so far. Stories, so you think stories, how could I use that? How well do I use that? Do I already use that? High number means I'm going to do it and I'm going to do it well. I'm going to incorporate it into my practice. A lower number might mean, you know what? I'm just not quite sure yet where it all fits. All right, here's your strategy, or here's your task rather. Taking about the next 2 or 3 minutes, pause the video, consider each one of those strategies we've looked at so far, and give it a number. Ready, set, begin. And welcome back. So close statements plus sort of a rating. Now, you can use rating absent of a close statement, of course, but when we just put numbers onto things, it helps us to reorient our thinking just a little bit more. So if I'm working with students, I might do something like this. I might say, students, we just looked at 4 different terms that are important for our understanding of this concept. 4 different vocabulary terms, here's your job. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 meaning you know it backwards and forwards, you know it really well, you've got it, you nailed it. A 1 might be, I don't even know what class I'm in, right? I'm being a little goofy, we put sense of humor in there. A low number means I don't have as much confidence. A high number means I have high levels of confidence. When we rate things and put numbers to them, for younger students, it might only be a 1 through 4 or 1 through 5 scale. Older students, we can expand the scale. When I attach a number to something, it forces me to think about it just a little bit differently. And let's go even one level deeper on the power of a rating scale. So let's say I ask a student, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about your understanding of this concept? Let's say I've taught a unit on westward expansion. Big topic. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about your comfort level on the topic of westward expansion? We have a quiz coming up tomorrow, just curious, on a scale of 1 to 10. And the student looks at you and say, I feel pretty good. I feel like I'm an 8. Then you say, okay, cool. Tell me 3 things that are important about westward expansion. And then they immediately tell you one thing. And then on the other 2, they're like, see, if they can't tell you 3 things that are important, they're probably not an 8. And I don't, as the teacher, I don't have to look at them and say, you know what, you rated yourself too high, you're probably not an 8 because you can't even tell me 3 things. I don't have to do that. I just have to let the student feel a little uncomfortable as a result of saying, I rated myself high, but I can't even verbalize 3 things. Maybe I ought to know this stuff a little bit better for the quiz tomorrow. Lots of different ways you can use rating scales. Here have been the strategies we've looked at, 10 strategies, 2 different ways, from stories all the way through rating scales. We are coming to the end of our session, and I want to say thank you for engaging in this information, for digging into it. Here's what I'll ask you to do. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have concerns, if you want to know a little bit more about something, even if you want to share a success story, there's my contact information. You could contact me through my email. You could go to my website. I have tons of freebies, tons of free strategies and things you can download there if you're interested. But I would love to hear from you. Any way I can support you going forward, don't hesitate to be in touch. Once again, on behalf of Barbara and the Teaching Fellows Institute, thanks for engaging. Hopefully we'll see you at some time in the future. Take care, everyone.